Professor Thomas Blackwood had always believed that rocks were more reliable than people, which probably explained why he was spending his spring break alone in the Cascade Mountains instead of joining his colleagues' annual migration to academic conferences in cities with decent coffee shops. Armed with a backpack full of geological survey equipment, enough granola bars to survive a minor apocalypse, and the kind of optimistic faith in technology that characterized people who spent more time with GPS devices than with actual human conversation, he was investigating magnetic anomalies that had been showing up on satellite surveys of the region. The anomalies themselves were fascinating, concentrated pockets of electromagnetic disturbance that seemed to shift location slightly over time, as if they were somehow alive. Thomas's working hypothesis involved rare earth mineral deposits, possibly meteorite fragments, or if he was really lucky, an entirely new type of crystalline formation that would make his career and finally give him something interesting to talk about at faculty parties. The plan was simple: hike to the coordinates showing the strongest magnetic signature, collect samples, document everything with scientific precision, and return to the university with enough data to justify his research grant and possibly earn him tenure. It was the kind of straightforward field work that Thomas had been doing for 8 years without major incident, which should have been his first warning that the universe was overdue for one of its periodic reminders about the dangers of assuming competence. The weather turned hostile around noon, transforming what had been a pleasant hiking day into something that resembled a meteorological temper tantrum. Clouds rolled in with the kind of aggressive efficiency that suggested they had somewhere important to be and weren't interested in accommodating human hiking schedules. Within minutes, Thomas found himself struggling through rain that seemed personally offended by his presence, while lightning strikes close enough to make his hair stand on end reminded him that he was essentially carrying a backpack full of metal objects in an environment where metal objects attracted the kind of attention that frequently proved fatal. His GPS device, which had been working perfectly that morning, chose this moment to inform him that it could no longer determine his location due to atmospheric interference and unusual electromagnetic conditions. His backup compass, the analog device that was supposed to function regardless of technological failures, began spinning like a DJ's turntable, apparently as confused by the magnetic anomalies as Thomas was fascinated by them. "Okay," he said to the indifferent wilderness, "this is why people think geologists are crazy. Normal people would go home when the weather turns threatening and their navigation equipment starts behaving like it's possessed. But no, I'm going to keep walking toward the source of mysterious electromagnetic disturbances in the middle of a lightning storm because the samples might be interesting." His self-directed commentary was interrupted by a lightning strike close enough that he could smell ozone and feel electricity dancing across his skin. Thomas abandoned scientific curiosity in favor of basic survival and scrambled toward what looked like a grove of trees that might provide some shelter from the storm. The trees turned out to be part of a forest that seemed oddly untouched by the wind and rain ravaging the more exposed areas. As Thomas pushed deeper into the grove, looking for a place to wait out the weather, he noticed that the electromagnetic interference was getting stronger rather than weaker. His compass was now spinning so rapidly that it looked like a child's toy, and his digital devices were displaying error messages in languages he was reasonably sure didn't exist. Following what he hoped was a game trail through underbrush that seemed determined to snag every piece of his equipment, Thomas emerged into a clearing that definitely wasn't marked on any topographical map he'd studied. He stood at the edge of what could only be described as a village, though it was unlike any human settlement he'd ever encountered. The buildings were constructed from black stone that seemed to absorb light while simultaneously glowing with a soft inner luminescence, as if they were carved from crystallized starlight. Architecture that suggested medieval European design filtered through the aesthetic sensibilities of someone who'd never been constrained by conventional engineering limitations created structures that rose in graceful spires and flowing curves that should have been impossible without modern construction techniques. Gardens filled with flowers that bloomed only at night created pathways between buildings, and Thomas could see fountains carved from the same luminescent stone, their water sparkling with phosphorescence that turned simple landscaping into something magical. Street lamps that generated light without any visible power source illuminated walkways where figures moved with the kind of fluid grace that immediately identified them as definitely not human. The residents were tall and elegant, with pale skin that possessed its own subtle luminescence and hair that ranged from silver to deep violet depending on how the light caught it. Most distinctively, They possessed delicate pointed ears and eyes that reflected available light like those of nocturnal predators. They moved through their village with the unconscious confidence of people who had never questioned their place in the world, and their voices carried musical qualities that made even mundane conversation sound like poetry. Thomas stood at the edge of the clearing, trying to process what he was seeing while his scientific training warred with his survival instincts. Every rational part of his mind insisted that he was experiencing some kind of altitude-induced hallucination, possibly complicated by hypothermia and electromagnetic radiation exposure. But his geological training had taught him to observe carefully and document thoroughly before drawing conclusions, and everything he was observing suggested that he discovered something far more extraordinary than unusual mineral deposits. His attempt at scientific observation was interrupted when one of the village residents noticed him lurking in the undergrowth like a particularly confused academic stalker. Instead of the alarm or hostility he expected, the young woman, he assumed she was female based on human gender indicators that might not apply to alien species, approached him with what appeared to be delighted curiosity. She was perhaps the equivalent of 25 in human years, with silver hair that moved like liquid metal and amber eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. Her clothing appeared to be woven from materials that shifted color depending on the angle of view, and when she moved, it was with the kind of natural grace that suggested she'd never experienced an awkward moment in her life. "Hello," she said in accented but perfectly clear English, "you must be the lost human Professor Blackwood. We've been expecting you." Thomas stared at her, his brain trying to process several impossibilities simultaneously. "You know my name?" "Of course. The magnetic disturbances you've been tracking are generated by our settlement's energy systems. We've been monitoring your research for several weeks, waiting to see if you'd actually find us." Her smile was brilliant and slightly predatory. "I'm Mira, and I have to say, your approach to field work is remarkably persistent. Most humans give up when their navigation equipment stops working. Most humans," Thomas managed, "haven't spent 8 years developing a professional relationship with obstinate geological phenomena. Also, you're not human, are you?" Myra's laughter sounded like wind chimes mixed with silver bells. "Very observant. We're Nox'ha, what your species might call vampires, though that's not entirely accurate. We've been living on Earth for over 1,000 years, maintaining hidden communities like this one throughout your world's more remote regions." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath his feet, though that might have been psychological rather than geological. "Vampires. You're telling me I've accidentally discovered a village of actual vampires?" "Alien vampires, technically. We're not undead humans, we're a separate species that requires certain trace minerals found in mammalian blood for optimal health. Think of it like your need for vitamin C, but more complicated and with better night vision." Mira gestured toward the village center, where more residents had begun gathering to observe the lost human professor. "Queen Seraphina will want to meet you. She's been particularly interested in your research." As they walked through streets that seemed to exist in defiance of normal architectural principles, Thomas tried to apply scientific methodology to a situation that cheerfully violated every assumption he'd made about biology, anthropology, and the general organization of reality. "So when you say Queen Seraphina has been interested in my research," he said, attempting to maintain some semblance of academic composure, "are we talking about casual curiosity or the kind of interest that ends with me becoming a research subject myself?" "Oh, definitely casual curiosity," Mira assured him with the kind of smile that suggested she found his concern both reasonable and unnecessary. "Though I should probably mention that she's been watching your career for about 3 years, ever since your paper on electromagnetic geological phenomena came to her attention. She finds your approach to unusual data patterns intriguing." Thomas considered this information while simultaneously trying to document everything he was seeing for what might be the most important research notes of his career. "Mira, can I ask you something that might sound rude?" "Of course. What exactly am I walking into here?" "Because from my perspective, this is either the greatest scientific discovery in human history or an elaborate setup for my mysterious disappearance, and I'm not entirely sure how to tell the difference." Myra's expression grew thoughtful, and Thomas realized she was genuinely considering his question rather than dismissing it. Professor Blackwood, you've spent your entire career looking for answers to questions that most humans consider unimportant. You've dedicated your life to understanding things that don't fit normal patterns. Would you really want to walk away from the biggest anomaly you've ever encountered just because it might be dangerous? Thomas looked around at the village that shouldn't exist, inhabited by people who weren't people, governed by a queen who'd apparently been following his academic career with interest, and realized that Mira was absolutely right. Whatever was about to happen, it was definitely going to be more interesting than grading undergraduate papers about sedimentary rock formation. Mira, he said, I think I'm ready to meet your queen. Queen Seraphina's throne room had clearly been designed by someone who understood that architecture could be used as a form of psychological warfare. Carved from living rock and illuminated by crystals that pulsed with bioluminescent light, the chamber managed to be simultaneously beautiful and intimidating, like a cathedral designed by aliens with excellent taste and a sophisticated understanding of power dynamics. Thomas stood in the center of the room, still muddy from his hike and increasingly aware that his field research outfit was probably not appropriate attire for meeting alien royalty. Around him, Nox'ha nobles arranged themselves with the kind of casual elegance that suggested they'd been born knowing how to look impressive at formal gatherings, while he felt like a particularly disheveled geology professor who'd wandered into the wrong fantasy novel. Queen Seraphina herself was. Thomas searched for words that could adequately describe what he was seeing and came up empty. Her hair flowed like liquid starlight, shifting between silver and pale gold as she moved. Her skin possessed the luminescent quality he'd noticed in other Nox'ha but refined to an ethereal perfection that made him question whether she was entirely corporeal. Her violet eyes seemed to look directly into his soul with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying, and when she smiled, Thomas felt like he was being evaluated by someone who could see far more than he was comfortable revealing. Professor Thomas Blackwood, she said, her voice carrying musical qualities that made his name sound like poetry, welcome to Lunhaven. I trust Mira has explained the basic nature of our community. She mentioned that you're alien vampires who've been secretly living on Earth for over a millennium, Thomas replied, then immediately wondered if his tendency toward blunt honesty was appropriate for diplomatic situations involving beings who could probably kill him without exerting themselves. Also, that you've been following my research for several years, which is either flattering or concerning depending on your intentions. Queen Seraphina's laughter was like silver bells mixed with distant thunder. Direct and practical. I appreciate that in a scholar. She gestured for him to approach the throne, and Thomas noticed that her movements possessed the predatory grace of someone who had never questioned her position at the top of any food chain. Your research into electromagnetic geological anomalies has been quite useful to us. You have an unusual talent for recognizing patterns that others dismiss as irrelevant. Thank you, Your Majesty. Though I have to ask. What exactly do alien vampires need with geological research? The same thing anyone needs with accurate information about their environment, she replied, settling into her throne with fluid grace. Survival, prosperity, and the ability to make informed decisions about the future. Your work has helped us understand how our settlement's energy systems interact with Earth's geological processes. Thomas felt his academic curiosity overriding his survival instincts, which probably explained why he'd never been good at faculty politics. Your energy systems are generating the magnetic anomalies I've been tracking. How do they work? What kind of power source creates that specific electromagnetic signature? The assembled nobles exchanged glances that suggested they'd never encountered a human who responded to alien revelation with requests for technical specifications. Queen Seraphina, however, looked genuinely delighted by his scientific enthusiasm. We harness what your species might call ambient cosmic energy, the electromagnetic radiation that flows between celestial bodies. Our technology converts stellar and lunar influences into usable power for our community's needs. She gestured toward the glowing crystals that illuminated the chamber. These are not merely decorative. They're components of a distributed energy network that's been refined over centuries of development. That's incredible, Thomas said, pulling out his field notebook and beginning to scribble observations with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered that physics was far more interesting than he'd previously believed. The implications for sustainable energy production, for understanding electromagnetic phenomena, for... He paused, looking up at Queen Seraphina with sudden realization. This is why you've been interested in my research. You've been evaluating whether human science is advanced enough to understand what you're doing. Among other things, she agreed, her violet eyes studying him with increasing interest. Tell me, Professor Blackwood, what is your honest assessment of humanity's readiness for contact with alien civilizations? Thomas considered the question while simultaneously trying to document the architectural details of a throne room that seemed to bend space around itself in physically impossible ways. Honestly, we're probably not ready. We're still arguing about climate change, we use social media to spread conspiracy theories about vaccines, and our most recent elections suggest that rational discourse is not humanity's strongest skill set. And yet, Queen Seraphina said, you're sitting in my throne room asking technical questions about cosmic energy instead of fleeing in terror or attempting to convert me to your dominant religious system. What makes you different from other humans? I'm probably not different from other humans. I'm just different from the humans who usually make contact decisions. Thomas looked around the chamber, taking in the impossible architecture and the faces of beings who'd been watching human civilization develop for centuries. I spend my time with rocks and electromagnetic readings because they're more predictable than people. But they're also constantly surprising me, constantly revealing new patterns and possibilities. I guess I've learned to expect the universe to be stranger than I initially assumed. Queen Seraphina rose from her throne and approached him with the kind of focused attention that made Thomas feel like he was being examined under a microscope designed by someone with advanced degrees in both science and intimidation. Professor Blackwood, she said, stopping close enough that he could see the subtle patterns of bioluminescence in her skin, would you be interested in a collaboration? What kind of collaboration? The kind where you help us better understand human society while we help you understand technologies that your species won't develop independently for several more centuries. Her smile was brilliant and slightly predatory. Consider it a cultural exchange program with significant benefits for both parties. Thomas looked around the throne room, taking in the advanced technology disguised as medieval fantasy architecture, the beings who represented humanity's first confirmed contact with alien intelligence, and the queen whose offer could either advance human scientific understanding by decades or result in his mysterious disappearance from recorded history. Your Majesty, he said, I accept your offer. But I should probably mention that I'm going to want to document everything, ask a lot of questions that might seem obvious to you, and occasionally get overexcited about geological phenomena in ways that other people find socially awkward. Professor Blackwood, Queen Seraphina replied, her expression suggesting that she found his academic enthusiasm both charming and useful, I believe those qualities are exactly what make you suitable for this position. Over the following days, Thomas found himself serving as an unofficial cultural consultant while learning more about Nox'ha society than any human in history. The aliens lived according to principles that blended ancient wisdom with advanced technology, maintaining their settlement through methods that seemed to violate several laws of physics while somehow existing in perfect harmony with Earth's ecosystem. Their social structure fascinated him, a combination of monarchical authority and democratic councils that managed to be both efficient and surprisingly egalitarian. Queen Seraphina ruled through a combination of personal charisma, strategic intelligence, and what appeared to be genuine concern for her people's welfare, while various councils handled specialized decisions involving everything from resource allocation to cultural preservation. The comedy emerged from Thomas's attempts to apply scientific methodology to social interactions that operated according to entirely different cultural assumptions. His efforts to document Nox'ha customs resulted in misunderstandings that would have been diplomatically catastrophic if Queen Seraphina didn't find his confusion endearing. During one particularly memorable incident, his attempt to give a formal presentation about human geological survey method somehow resulted in what the Nox'ha interpreted as a marriage proposal, leading to 3 hours of increasingly frantic explanation while Queen Seraphina watched with obvious amusement. Professor Blackwood, she said after he'd finally sorted out the cultural confusion, your approach to interpersonal communication is remarkably similar to your approach to geological research, thorough, well-intentioned, and occasionally productive in completely unexpected ways. Their working relationship gradually developed into something more personal through shared experiences that revealed their compatibility beyond their initial professional interest. When Thomas mentioned his fascination with the settlement's energy systems, Queen Seraphina arranged for him to work with their technical specialists, leading to collaborative research that combined Nox'ha cosmic energy manipulation with human electromagnetic theory. Your species, she observed during one of their evening conversations in her private chambers, has an unusual talent for recognizing patterns across apparently unrelated phenomena. Most civilizations develop specialized knowledge in narrow areas. Humans seem to excel at finding connections between different fields of study. Maybe because we're too young as a species to have developed proper academic boundaries, Thomas replied, studying readings from instruments that measured electromagnetic phenomena he was still learning to understand. We haven't been around long enough to convince ourselves that geology and astronomy and biology are completely separate subjects. That perspective, Queen Seraphina said, moving to look over his shoulder at the data displays, is precisely why your species shows such promise for eventual inclusion in galactic civilization. Thomas looked up at her, noting how the chamber's crystalline lighting made her luminescent skin seem to glow with inner fire. Are there others? Other alien species living secretly on Earth? A few, though most maintain even greater secrecy than we do. The Nox'ha have been here longest and have developed the most sophisticated relationship with human civilization. Her expression grew thoughtful. We've been waiting for the right moment to make contact, but the timing never seems optimal. Your species is developing rapidly, but also somewhat chaotically. What would make the timing right? Queen Seraphina was quiet for a moment, her violet eyes studying his face with the kind of intensity that made Thomas feel like she was reading thoughts he wasn't aware he was having. Perhaps, she said softly, the right timing isn't about waiting for humanity to change. Perhaps it's about finding the right humans to serve as bridges between our worlds. As they worked together late into the night, combining alien technology with human scientific curiosity, Thomas began to understand that his accidental discovery of Lunhaven might represent something far more significant than academic research. The connection developing between him and Queen Seraphina felt like the beginning of something that could transform both their people's understanding of what was possible when different worlds found ways to work together. Thomas had been living in Lunhaven for 3 weeks when he realized that his planned overnight stay had evolved into something resembling a research residency, a cultural exchange program, and possibly the beginning of an interspecies diplomatic relationship that no human government knew existed. His university colleagues probably assumed he'd gotten lost and died in a hiking accident, which wasn't entirely inaccurate except for the dying part. The integration process had its challenges. Nox'ha daily schedules operated according to lunar cycles rather than solar patterns, which meant Thomas found himself attending council meetings at 3 a.m. and conducting research during what his circadian rhythms insisted should be sleeping hours. Their cuisine consisted largely of foods that looked beautiful and tasted like someone had mixed exotic spices with liquid starlight, resulting in meals that were visually stunning and nutritionally baffling. Most complicated of all was navigating social interactions with beings who possessed enhanced sensory capabilities and cultural traditions that had developed over centuries of existence. Thomas discovered this during his first formal dinner with the Nox'ha Council of Elders, when his attempt to complement the architecture somehow resulted in him accidentally challenging the eldest counselor to ritual combat over territorial display rights. Professor Blackwood, Queen Seraphina had said with barely suppressed laughter as she defused the situation, perhaps we should establish a protocol for your cultural observations that doesn't involve inadvertently insulting our senior leadership. I was trying to express appreciation for the mathematical precision of the structural engineering, Thomas protested. How was I supposed to know that commenting on building techniques could be interpreted as questioning someone's territorial authority? Because, Elder Vane replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child, among the Nox'ha, architectural achievement is directly connected to social status and personal power. Analyzing our construction methods without proper deference suggests you consider yourself qualified to evaluate our capabilities. Thomas spent the following days working with Mira to develop what they jokingly called the Human Cultural Disaster Prevention Protocol, essentially a handbook for avoiding accidental diplomatic incidents while conducting scientific research among beings whose social customs were both sophisticated and completely alien to human experience. The comedy reached its peak during Thomas's attempt to present his preliminary findings about Nox'ha energy systems to the full council. His academic presentation style, which involved detailed data analysis and systematic questioning of underlying assumptions, managed to violate approximately 12 different cultural protocols while simultaneously proposing modifications to technology that had been refined over centuries. With respect, Professor Blackwood, Counselor Thane said after Thomas had spent 20 minutes deconstructing the theoretical basis of their cosmic energy collection methods, "Are you suggesting that our ancestral technologies require improvement by someone who has been studying them for less than a month?" "I'm suggesting that human electromagnetic theory might offer complementary perspectives that could enhance efficiency without fundamentally altering your existing systems," Thomas replied, completely missing the subtle signs of offense radiating from the assembled counselors. For example, if you adjusted the crystalline matrix alignment by approximately 15 degrees and modified the resonance frequency to account for seasonal variations in cosmic radiation. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or execution. Thomas looked around the chamber, noting the expressions of beings who appeared to be calculating whether his suggestions represented valuable innovation or dangerous presumption. Queen Seraphina intervened before the situation could deteriorate further. "Council members," she said with the kind of diplomatic authority that reminded everyone why she was qualified to rule, "Professor Blackwood's observations raise interesting possibilities for research collaboration. Perhaps we could establish a joint working group to evaluate his proposals." The solution satisfied everyone except Thomas, who remained blissfully unaware that he'd narrowly avoided triggering a diplomatic crisis by accidentally questioning the technological competence of an alien civilization. His relationship with Queen Seraphina continued to develop through shared experiences that revealed their compatibility beyond their professional collaboration. When a severe storm threatened the settlement's energy systems, they worked together to implement emergency protocols that combined Nox'ha technology with Thomas's understanding of electromagnetic phenomena to maintain power during critical infrastructure failures. "Your ability to see patterns across different scales of analysis," Queen Seraphina observed as they monitored energy flow readings during the crisis, "is remarkably useful for troubleshooting complex systems. Most Nox'ha specialists focus on specific technical areas, but you automatically look for connections between apparently unrelated phenomena. It's probably a survival mechanism developed from years of academic research," Thomas replied, adjusting monitoring equipment while simultaneously tracking weather patterns through the settlement's advanced sensing arrays. "When you're working with limited funding and equipment that breaks down regularly, you learn to improvise solutions using whatever resources are available. That resourcefulness," she said, standing close enough that he could feel the subtle warmth generated by her luminescent skin, "is one of the qualities I find most attractive about your species." Thomas looked up from his readings, meeting her violet eyes directly. "Are we talking about general human characteristics, or are you making this conversation more personal than professional protocol probably recommends?" Queen Seraphina's smile was brilliant and slightly predatory. "Professor Blackwood, I stopped following professional protocol the day I decided to invite a lost human geologist to serve as cultural advisor to an alien civilization." Their growing connection faced a major obstacle when the Nox'ha High Council, a governing body composed of representatives from hidden settlements throughout the world, learned of Thomas's presence and demanded an immediate review of Lunhaven's contact protocols. The emergency session was called by Elder Korith, an ancient Nox'ha whose approach to security made paranoid intelligence agencies look trusting and optimistic. "Queen Seraphina," Elder Korith announced via holographic projection from the council's secured location, "you have violated fundamental secrecy protocols by exposing our existence to an unvetted human subject. The contamination of our security must be addressed before it spreads to other settlements." Thomas found himself standing before a tribunal of alien leaders whose combined age exceeded human civilization, being evaluated for risks he didn't entirely understand by beings whose decision-making processes operated according to principles that had been established before his species developed agriculture. The human must undergo memory modification, Elder Korith continued, and be returned to his previous location with false memories of a successful hiking expedition. All evidence of contact must be eliminated to preserve operational security. Respectfully, Queen Seraphina replied with the kind of formal politeness that suggested significant disagreement. Professor Blackwood has demonstrated exceptional value as a cultural liaison and research collaborator. His integration into our community has proceeded without security incidents, and his contributions to our understanding of human scientific development have been substantial. His contributions are irrelevant if his knowledge compromises the safety of Nox'ha settlements worldwide, Elder Korith countered. One human's scientific curiosity cannot be allowed to risk exposure that could endanger thousands of our people. Thomas realized he was witnessing a debate about his own fate conducted by beings whose perspectives spanned centuries of experience with human civilization. The irony wasn't lost on him that his accidental discovery of alien life had led to him becoming a subject of alien political science. "If I may," he said, addressing the council with the kind of nervous determination he usually reserved for defending research proposals to skeptical academic committees, "I'd like to point out that my disappearance is going to trigger exactly the kind of human investigation you're trying to prevent." The holographic projection turned toward him with the expression of someone who had just heard furniture attempt to participate in political debate. "Explain." "I'm a tenured university professor whose research into electromagnetic anomalies has been funded by government grants. My extended absence will result in search and rescue operations followed by federal investigation of my research sites. If you want to avoid human attention, making me disappear is probably the worst possible strategy." Elder Korith considered this information with the expression of someone discovering that their carefully planned security protocols had an unexpected flaw. "What alternative do you propose?" Thomas looked at Queen Seraphina, seeing encouragement in her violet eyes, and made a decision that would either solve the crisis or make it considerably worse. "Controlled disclosure," he said. "Instead of hiding from human investigation, we get ahead of it. I returned to my university with a carefully curated story about discovering an isolated community of, let's call them advanced human societies with unusual lifestyle choices. I provide just enough information to satisfy academic curiosity without revealing anything that compromises your actual security." The silence that followed was profound enough that Thomas could hear his own heartbeat. Around the chamber, Nox'ha counselors exchanged glances that involved several layers of nonverbal communication he couldn't interpret. "You're proposing," Queen Seraphina said slowly, "to serve as a bridge between our civilizations by managing the flow of information in both directions." "I'm proposing to do what I've been doing for 3 weeks, but with official authorization and better protocols for preventing accidental diplomatic incidents." Thomas looked directly at the holographic projection of Elder Korith. "You've been watching human development for 1,000 years. Maybe it's time to start influencing it more directly." The council session continued for several more hours, but Thomas could tell that something fundamental had shifted in the nature of the conversation. Instead of debating whether to eliminate the security risk he represented, they were beginning to discuss whether he might actually represent an opportunity they'd been waiting for. As the session concluded and the holographic projections faded, Queen Seraphina approached him with an expression that mixed relief with anticipation. "Thomas," she said, "I believe you may have just talked yourself into becoming humanity's first official alien cultural specialist. Is that good or bad?" "That," she replied, moving close enough that he could see the subtle patterns of bioluminescence in her skin, "depends entirely on whether you're prepared for your life to become far more complicated and infinitely more interesting than anything you experienced as a geology professor." Thomas considered this while looking around the throne room where he'd accidentally stumbled into first contact with alien civilization, thinking about the queen whose interest had transformed his understanding of what was possible, and the choice between returning to a life of grading undergraduate papers or helping to build the foundation for interspecies cooperation. "Your Majesty," he said, "I think I'm ready for complicated and interesting." The crisis began exactly as Thomas had predicted, with search and rescue teams systematically working their way through the Cascade Mountains, looking for a missing geology professor whose research grant required him to file regular location reports that had stopped arriving 3 weeks earlier. Park rangers, university colleagues, and federal investigators were all converging on the area where his GPS signal had last been detected, equipped with sophisticated tracking technology and the kind of determined thoroughness that would inevitably lead them to discover things that weren't supposed to exist. Queen Seraphina stood in Lunhaven's command center, monitoring human communication channels while coordinating with other Nox'ha settlements about potential security responses. The holographic displays showed search teams moving steadily closer to the concealed approaches to their village, while encrypted communications revealed that several government agencies had developed interest in the electromagnetic anomalies that had originally attracted Thomas to the region. How long before they reached the outer perimeter? She asked Captain Thane, the settlement's security coordinator. Approximately 18 hours, assuming current search patterns and weather conditions, he replied, manipulating tactical displays that showed human positions relative to Nox'ha defensive systems. We can maintain concealment indefinitely, but if Professor Blackwood's disappearance triggers a federal investigation of the area, we may face long-term monitoring that compromises operational security. Thomas studied the displays with the expression of someone watching his two worlds collide in real time. The lead investigator is Dr. Sarah Williams from the university's geology department, he said, recognizing names and faces on the communication intercepts. She's also my ex-girlfriend, which means she knows my research methods well enough to predict where I would have gone looking for samples. Is that helpful or problematic? Queen Seraphina asked. Both. Sarah's smart enough to find this place if she's determined enough to keep looking, but she's also professional enough to handle unexpected discoveries without immediately calling in the military. Thomas paused, studying the search patterns with growing understanding. Actually, I think she's already suspicious that something unusual is happening. Look at how she's directing the search. She's focusing on areas where the electromagnetic readings are strongest, not where a lost hiker would logically seek shelter. Queen Seraphina made a decision that surprised everyone in the command center, including herself. Captain Thane, prepare for controlled first contact. We're going to resolve this situation by managing the discovery rather than preventing it. Your Majesty, Captain Thane said with the expression of someone who had just heard his sovereign announce plans to jump off a cliff without checking whether there was water below. Are you certain that's advisable? I'm certain that hiding from this problem won't make it disappear, and I'm certain that Professor Blackwood is right about the consequences of making him vanish mysteriously. She turned to Thomas with the kind of focused attention that suggested important decisions were being made. Thomas, are you prepared to serve as humanity's first official contact with alien civilization? Honestly? No. But I'm prepared to try, which is probably the best qualification anyone could have for a job that's never existed before. The first contact protocols developed over the next 12 hours were unlike anything in the diplomatic history of either species. Instead of formal government-to-government communication, they planned an approach based on academic research collaboration, scientific curiosity, and the personal relationships that Thomas had maintained with his colleagues despite his tendency to disappear into field work for weeks at a time. When Dr. Sarah Williams and her search team finally located Thomas at the edge of Lunhaven, they found him conducting electromagnetic readings with equipment that was obviously more advanced than anything available through normal research grants. His explanation, that he'd discovered an isolated community of environmental researchers with access to experimental technology, was carefully crafted to satisfy immediate curiosity without revealing information that could compromise Nox'ha security. Thomas, Sarah said, her relief at finding him alive mixing with scientific curiosity about the readings her instruments were detecting. What exactly have you found here? Something that's going to change how we understand electromagnetic geology, sustainable energy systems, and possibly the relationship between human development and environmental harmony, he replied, leading her team toward the village center where Queen Seraphina waited with a carefully selected group of Nox'ha who could pass for unusually impressive humans if observed without too much scientific scrutiny. The introduction scene unfolded with the kind of careful choreography that comes from planning first contact between species whose mutual survival depends on getting the details right. Queen Seraphina, introduced as Dr. Seraphina Nightshade, director of an advanced environmental research cooperative, welcomed the search team with the kind of gracious authority that made her seem like exactly the sort of person who might run a cutting-edge scientific community in the middle of nowhere. Dr. Williams, she said, her accent carefully modulated to suggest European education rather than alien origin, Professor Blackwood has been invaluable in helping us understand how our research might benefit the broader scientific community. His expertise in electromagnetic phenomena has opened possibilities we hadn't previously considered. Sarah studied Queen Seraphina with the expression of someone encountering a puzzle that was both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Dr. Nightshade, I have to ask, how is your community achieving these electromagnetic readings? The energy signatures we're detecting aren't consistent with any known technology. Experimental applications of principles that most institutions aren't ready to explore, Queen Seraphina replied with the kind of diplomatic vagueness that suggested proprietary research. Professor Blackwood has been helping us evaluate whether the broader academic community might be prepared for controlled disclosure of our methods. The conversation continued with Thomas serving as translator and mediator between human academic curiosity and Nox'ha security requirements. His geological training proved invaluable in providing technical explanations that satisfied scientific inquiry without revealing information that could compromise the Nox'ha's true nature. The comedy emerged from the elaborate performance required to present an alien civilization as an advanced human research community. Queen Seraphina's attempts to explain cosmic energy manipulation in terms of conventional physics resulted in descriptions that were technically accurate but so far beyond current human understanding that they sounded like science fiction. The Nox'ha's casual use of technology that violated known physical laws had to be carefully hidden or explained as proprietary experimental devices. So you're saying, Sarah said, studying readings that showed impossible energy efficiency ratios, that your community has developed sustainable energy systems that operate at nearly 100% efficiency while producing no measurable waste products. We've had several centuries, several decades, to refine our approach, Queen Seraphina replied, catching herself before revealing information about Nox'ha longevity. Trial and error, combined with perspectives that aren't constrained by conventional assumptions about energy conservation. The resolution came when Sarah and her team agreed to classify the discovery as a private research cooperative deserving of academic respect and protective confidentiality rather than government oversight. Thomas's status as missing person was resolved by his decision to take extended leave from the university to serve as liaison between the academic community and Lunhaven's research programs. Thomas, Sarah said during their private conversation before her team departed, I don't know what you've really found here, but I can tell it's important. Just, be careful, okay? These people, Dr. Nightshade especially, there's something about them that I can't quite identify. Sarah, Thomas replied, I promise you that everything I'm doing here is aimed at advancing human scientific understanding in ways that benefit everyone involved. And if that ever changes, you'll be the first person I contact. The aftermath of first contact involved months of careful relationship building between human academic institutions and Lunhaven's research programs. Thomas found himself serving as cultural translator, helping human scientists understand research that operated according to principles they hadn't discovered yet, while helping the Nox'ha understand human scientific culture and its potential for eventual inclusion in galactic civilization. His relationship with Queen Seraphina evolved from professional collaboration to something far more personal through shared experiences that revealed their compatibility across species boundaries. Their work together established protocols for peaceful coexistence and gradual disclosure that could eventually lead to open contact between their peoples. Thomas, she said during one of their evening conversations in the crystalline gardens that surrounded her private chambers, do you ever regret the choice you made? Your life would have been much simpler if you had never found our village. Simpler, maybe, he replied, studying readings from instruments that measured phenomena he was still learning to understand while simultaneously documenting the most important research of his career. But I spent 8 years as a geology professor feeling like I was studying a universe that was far more interesting than anyone realized. Now I'm helping to build bridges between worlds that most people don't know exist. Simple was never really an option once I understood what was actually possible. And what do you think is possible? Thomas looked around at the village that existed in harmony with Earth's ecosystem while incorporating technology that operated according to principles beyond human comprehension, at the woman whose love had transformed his understanding of what it meant to belong somewhere, and at the future they were building together. Everything, he said. I think everything is possible when different worlds find ways to work together instead of hiding from each other. Years later, as they stood together in the first joint human Nox'ha research facility, watching human and alien scientists collaborate on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone, they reflected on how a wrong turn in the mountains had led to the right path for both their civilizations. Thomas's accidental discovery had transformed from a hiking mishap into humanity's first successful interspecies diplomatic relationship, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary destinies begin with the most ordinary mistakes. His willingness to embrace the unknown, to find wonder in the impossible, and to build relationships based on curiosity rather than fear had become the model for a new era of cooperation between worlds. Their love story became the foundation for protocols that would eventually guide humanity's inclusion in galactic civilization, demonstrating that sometimes being lost is just the first step toward finding something you never knew you were looking for.